We're a month away from the premiere of the first Infinite Fortress movie, and Famitsu is obviously trending again. But while the hype is swirling about what's coming, today I want to talk to you about what's behind it, because if there's one thing I've always found crazy about this anime, it's how it's produced. While most of the anime struggle to complete episodes a week or hours before they air, Famitsu is worked on years in advance. For example, the first episode of the fourth season began production in 2022 and came out in 2024. How is something like this possible in an industry where everything is done at the last minute? What's different about it, and what does this mean for the future of movies? Today I'm not here to talk about animation, fights, or hype, but rather about production. But today I do want to delve deeper to find out how Famitsu became the biggest exception in current anime. To understand why the output is so impressive, you first have to understand how the anime industry works today, and the short answer is that it works poorly. Most studios work against the clock, producing episodes just days or even hours before they air. This is no exaggeration. There are documented cases where animators deliver scenes at dawn for an episode that airs the same night, and this doesn't happen at obscure studios. It happened to Nearer, which had to delay its broadcast several times due to production issues, and it happens to dozens of anime that don't make the news but are affected by the same problem. There's no time. This is because the Japanese production system is designed to work like an assembly line. There's the production committee, the group of companies that finances the animation. They provide the money, but they also demand dates and deadlines that almost never adapt to the reality of the studios. In other words, the schedule is imposed from above and often before the animation team even exists. The studio in charge of animating the series receives a budget, a schedule, and a script, but often pre-production is not complete. The staff is not confirmed, and even then the broadcast date is already set. This gives rise to productions where episodes are made on the fly. They share their contracts with other smaller studios, sometimes even in other countries, and there is no possibility of correcting all the errors before they air. That is why it is so common for Blu-rays to have, so to speak, improvements. It is not that they do it on a whim, it is that they do not arrive on time for the television broadcast and they take advantage of the second opportunity to fix what they could. In this context, talking about anime that are 3 months in advance already seems like something positive, and in some cases it is. There are productions that manage to work with a half year or even a year's margin, but I would even say that they are the exception. Normally, dates dictate and teens are tight, tired, and in many cases without job guarantees. So when an anime comes out that not only looks spectacular but is also produced well in advance, one wonders, how is that possible? And it's not like it's only happened once. Ever since the first season has been working with plenty of lead time. The anime was officially announced in mid-2018. It's said that production had been underway since the beginning of that year or even earlier. When it premiered in April 2019, most of the episodes were already finished, and that practice hasn't changed. With each new season or film has been working years in advance, which in today's industry is completely unthinkable. As we mentioned, the first episode of the Pillar training arc, which premiered in May 2024, began production in April 2022. The first draft of the storyboard was uploaded on April 16th of that year. On June 2nd, the dubbing was already being reported, and by October 2022, the animation had already begun. In other words, while we were all watching the Red Light District arc, they were already 2 arcs ahead of schedule. And this is no coincidence. This is part of a completely different production logic. While the rest of the industry is running after the schedule, Ufotable is moving it ahead. While other studios are working blindly without knowing if they will make it to the end of the season, Famitsu arrives with everything finished in advance. And this time difference has a direct impact on the quality of the product. When an episode is worked on weeks or months in advance, the animators can experiment, correct, and redefine details. They can work calmly, focusing on the composition, the effects, and the fluid sequences that impact us so much. Now, imagine if an episode was worked on years in advance. That's why when you watch an episode, it feels more like a movie than a TV show, because it was literally produced like a movie with planning, care, and a work chain where all departments have time to shine. And most importantly, when the animators work with time, they don't destroy themselves in the process. So yes, the production is crazy, but not because it's excessive, but because it's exceptional. Because while anime in general is made with blood, sweat, and deadlines, Famitsu is made with something that almost doesn't exist in this industry: time. We just mentioned that most anime studios work against the clock, producing bad runs, outsourcing everything they can, and barely surviving between impossible deadlines. But then, how does Ufotable fit into all this? The short answer is that it doesn't. Ufotable doesn't play by the same rules as the rest of the industry, and it's not because it has access to unknown technology or because it has superhuman animators. The key lies in how the studio is structured, how it manages its time, how it prioritizes its projects. First and foremost, Ufotable produces everything in-house. Unlike most studios that outsource a large portion of the work, such as key animation, background art, CGI, coloring, or post-production, Ufotable keeps everything in-house. From character design, CGI, art direction, to final editing, everything is handled in-house. This has an immediate consequence: total control. Control over quality, timing, and technical standards. When you don't depend on another studio to deliver dozens on time or on an external freelancer to return the corrected funds, you can ensure visual and narrative coherence that is practically impossible in other cases. Second, Ufotable doesn't work on multiple anime at the same time. It doesn't do 10 projects a year, sometimes not even 2. The studio concentrates all its human and technical resources on a single thing, and you can see that to put it into perspective. Studios like MAP can have 5 or 6 simultaneous productions. That means their staff has to be split up, top animators have to jump from project to project, and schedules clash. At Ufotable, each animator is exclusively dedicated to the same project for years. Third, they don't accept impossible dates. Ufotable doesn't announce a release date until production is well underway. They don't work with a committee that tells them, this anime has to come out in October, no matter what, like most others. And even though they do work with committees, they have much greater autonomy because they've already earned the trust of the industry. Let's repeat. We have the example of the production of the first episode of the Pillar Training arc. It started in April 2022 and premiered in May 2024. 2 years of production for one episode. And this was no exception, since the first season was produced well in advance. The Infinite Train was worked on in parallel, with a high delivery rate, following the same pattern: long lead time, plenty of time, and complete control. But how did they manage to get to the point where Ufotable became this studio with so much power and room to maneuver? The story of Ufotable begins in 2000, but it was in the 2010s that they really exploded. The turning point was the Fate saga, more specifically Fate Zero and then Heen Fields. Those works consolidated Ufotable's image as a studio capable of combining traditional 2D animation with impeccably integrated CG effects and with artistic direction at the level of cinema. From then on, the name Ufotable became synonymous with quality, animated wallpapers, particles floating in every shot, impossible camera movements, and a visual aesthetic that is unmatched. They were no longer just a competent studio, they were a prestigious brand, that they made the definitive leap. Although many do not remember it, when the anime adaptation of the manga was announced in 2018, Famitsu was not the phenomenon it is today. It did so well, it was popular, but it wasn't the juggernaut it became after the anime. And in fact, within Fate itself, Famitsu wasn't the priority at that time. Many of its star animators were still working on Heaven's Field. According to rumors, the first season of Kimetsu was made with a small team where many animators were freelancers or lesser-known staff from the studio. What made the difference was that they had time to coordinate, to experiment, and to plan each cut. As time went on, more key members of the staff began to join. By episode 19, the anime became a cultural phenomenon. From then on, Ufotable poured all of its resources into the franchise, because from that moment on, Ufotable became a monolithic studio focused on a single goal: making Kimetsu no Yaiba the most popular anime. And to do that, they sacrificed other things. Already announced projects like Token Rambo, Majoyo, or even possible Fate sequels were put on indefinite hold. And why? Because the entire UFO machinery went all in on Famitsu, and with that decision they achieved what no one else in the industry is achieving: making a production without rushing, without mistakes or overflows. Another key difference is in the USG. While many studios use it as a resource to cut costs or gain time, Ufotable integrates it as part of the aesthetics of the work. It doesn't hide it, it enhances it. The cameras rotate, the backgrounds move, the lighting effects intersect with traditional animation, and none of this can be done in 2 weeks. It takes months and even years. That's why they can afford things like episode 1 of season 4, a full hour of movie-quality animation. In short, Ufotable doesn't have a magic formula. It has a strategic decision. They decided to prioritize quality over quantity. They decided to do one thing, but to do it flawlessly. And they decided that if they don't have enough time, it doesn't get done. And that model, although it's not viable for all studios, works for them. Kimetsu is a global phenomenon. It breaks box office records, and every time a new season or movie is released, the whole world watches. Ufotable turned anime production into something that looks more like a Hollywood blockbuster than a Japanese anime. That's why I say, Ufotable doesn't play by the same rules. Because while the rest are trying to survive the schedules, they are years ahead. Because while other studios work to comply, they work to surpass themselves. Everything we said about Ufotable is stronger when we see how they specifically handled Kimetsu, and because this is not just an isolated case of a good production, It is an example of surgical planning from the first minute and probably one of the best pieces of pre-production in the history of modern anime. The story officially begins in June 2018 when the anime adaptation confirmed. By that time, the manga had already been published for a long time and was entering its final stretch. It was neither a failure nor a boom. It sold well, it had its followers, but it was still not even close to the phenomenon it would become. The interesting thing is that although the announcement was made in mid-2018, the actual production took place that year or even earlier. But we're not talking about meetings or initial concepts here. We're talking about storyboards, character designs, aesthetic decisions, and general planning. From the beginning, the Kimetsu project wasn't a quick bet. It was a long-term move, a conscious gamble in the midst of a market that prefers the short term. A sign of that confidence was the fact that the first season would have 26 consecutive episodes without a break in between. While most animes are cut off after 12 or 13 episodes to see if they work, this decision was almost suicidal or courageous, depending on how you look at it. But the truth is that they didn't improvise. The 26 episodes were already largely produced before the broadcast began, and that's very important. Not only did they work with a margin, but they planned everything as a complete experience, not as something that would be put together on the fly. From the breathwork design that blended traditional animation with digital effects to the hand-painted backgrounds and orchestrated music, everything was designed to work as a cohesive unit. But there was something even more important. The team that worked on that first season was not the studio's all-star team. While many key directors were finishing other projects like Fate, the production was moving forward with a small group of animators, freelancers, and young talents, proving that the secret wasn't just the staff, but the time they had to work. With planning, any talented team can perform at their best, and Kimetsu proved that. As the anime gained popularity, the staff at Ufotable began to reorganize. More star members joined the franchise. The most emblematic case was episode 19, which redefined the standard of what an anime fight could be. This episode not only exploded on social media, but also marked the turning point within the Ufotable itself. From there, Kimetsu went from being a major project to a priority. Things escalated further with Infinity Train, a film that was not only a box office success in Japan, but broke records globally, surpassing Spirited Away as the highest-grossing anime film of all time. And how did they do it? Again, with planning, Ufotable didn't improvise a film between seasons. They were already working between Infinity while finishing the first season, and this was only possible because they knew where they were going from the beginning, and this model didn't stop there. For each season that came after, the Red Light District art, the Blacksmith art, and now the Pillar Training art, the story was the same. Productions finished or almost finished before broadcast. In each case, the pattern repeated itself. Storyboarding, voice acting, and animation, starting a year or two in advance. And now that the Infinite Fortress trilogy is coming, everything points to the same. Last season began in 2022 and came up in 2024. It wouldn't be strange to think that production on the second film is wrapping up and work is underway on the third. In short, is of luck. It's not just talent, it's structural planning from day one, and it shows in every shot, in every cut, in every episode that feels like a small movie. Because when you work with time, everything improves. The narrative rhythm, the animation, the direction, the effects, the sound. Kimetsu wasn't born as a phenomenon, it was built as one from the inside out, from the beginning. And the most impressive thing is that it's still that way 5 years later. With everything we know about how Ufotable works, the question many will be asking is whether they've finished the first film yet, and the answer is more than obvious. Yes, it's finished. Just looking at the background is enough to understand that Ufotable works at least 2 years in advance. Imagine if they work with almost 24 months to spare for an episode. What can we think of for one of the most anticipated films of the decade? Applying the same logic and taking into account that the most recent season was ready months ago, the obvious assumption is that the first film is already finished, the second could be finished, and the third could be in pre-production. Ufotable does not start each project from scratch once the previous one is released. Everything is planned together, and this also makes more sense when we think about what it takes to animate a film. Yes, a film production may sound more demanding than an anime, but in this case a Kimetsu film is equivalent to about 6 or 8 episodes depending on the content being adapted. And if they have already managed to produce complete seasons of 26 or 11 episodes, a film does not represent a greater challenge in terms of workload, but rather an opportunity to further polish each shot. We must also take into account the narrative structure of the Infinite Fortress arc. The manga doesn't divide the climax into 3 parts, but the film adaptation requires choosing cutting points that maintain rhythm, tension, and visual coherence, which involves redesigning scenes, planning new original sequences, and all of that takes months or even years if you want to do it right. Ufotable doesn't improvise. If they're going to adapt the most important fights from the manga, they'll do it with the same care they gave to each key episode of the previous seasons. We can't forget a detail that's often overlooked: the wear and tear on the team. Ufotable has been working exclusively on Famitsu no Yaiba for more than 5 years. During that time, other projects from the studio were put on hold or cancelled altogether, because the staff is completely focused on Famitsu no Yaiba, but also because it seems like the studio already wants to end this franchise, not out of contempt for the project, but because they have already fulfilled their goal, consolidated their name, set a very high technical standard, and broken every imaginable box office record. That's why it makes no sense for them to unnecessarily stretch out the ending. Releasing a movie every 2 years would kill the pace and wear out the fans. Ufotable knows this. They know that maintaining excitement requires continuity, and if they have the resources to do so, they will do it as always with time, planning, and precision. So yes, even though we don't have an official setup, the first movie is ready, the second is underway, and the third is on its way. What we're seeing isn't a race against time like the rest of the current anime. It's a production designed with years of margin, because that's what sets Ufotable apart from the rest. After seeing how Ufotable work with Famitsu no Yaiba, another question you might ask yourself is, why doesn't all anime work like this? Because there are no more studios working 2 years in advance, avoiding mistakes, taking care of their equipment and delivering consistent quality. The answer is simple: because it can't be done. The UFO model is not replicable for most of the anime industry. Not because it is a secret or because other studios don't want to. It is a question of structure, resources, and power. Ufotable, it does not depend on making many anime per year. Most studios need to accept several projects to stay afloat. If they do not animate 3 or 4 anime per year, there simply is no money coming in to pay salaries, rent, equipment maintenance, and other expenses. Ufotable can afford to focus on a single project because it generates more than enough. $1 million box office, inconsistent merchandise, collaborations with brands, video games, cafes, events. It is a franchise that sustains the entire studio on its own. Second, not all studios have the independence to manage their schedules. Most work under the schedule imposed by production committees that demand releases on specific dates to synchronize marketing campaigns, manga sales, figures. Ufotable has more leeway because it has earned the trust of Aniplex and the rest of the investors. They know that if they take their time, they will deliver something worthwhile. And third, and perhaps most importantly, doing this requires a long-term vision. The anime industry is designed for the short term, releasing content quickly, capturing attention, and selling. Very few committees are willing to wait 2 or 3 years for a season if they can release something cheaper and faster in 6 months. And that is what sets UFO apart. They are not running after content, they are building a work. But of course, this did not happen overnight. Ufotable has a very long history, more than 20 years, not to establish itself as a studio, but as its own production company, where they could manage absolutely all the processes without the need for others to interfere. And it is thanks to this that they can afford to work this way with any of their projects. There are other studios that also work this way. Mappa tried to do this and broke down along the way. Trying to do something that took other studios 20 years in a matter of 5 or 3 years is simply not viable. Ufotable's logic cannot be imitated, and even if it could be imitated, it would take time. It is not just a commercial success or simply an anime with good animation. It is an anomaly, an exception within an industry collapsed by impossible schedules, outsourcing, and precarious conditions. While many other studios struggle to deliver episodes that barely arrive on time, Famitsu was produced years in advance, and not by luck, but by choice. Ufotable does not improvise, does not rush, does not mass produce, but rather focuses precisely on a single project, planning it from the beginning and executing it as if each episode were a movie. They take the time necessary to do it like no one else. That formula that seems real today is what allowed them to maintain a consistent quality for 5 years without a single decline. And now with the Infinite Fortress trilogy on the way, everything points to them closing this saga with the same seriousness with which they began it. They are not stretching the ending, they are not rushing to finish it, they have it planned and work is already underway. Because it's not a seasonal product, it is an hour that was designed to stand firm over time. Its Ufotable, more than a studio, became its architect, a studio that not only raised the level of Japanese animation, but also demonstrated something fundamental. When you trust the team, give them time and let them work without rushing, the result is out of this world. That is why Famitsu cannot be repeated, not because there is no talent in other studios, but because there is no time. And that changes everything in today's anime.